right, well, good morning, everybody. I hope everyone is doing well today. My name is John Miles, and I'm the administrator of the Fiscal Oversight and Support Office. And with us today, we have our consultants from the Fiscal Oversight Office, and we have Christine Davis, who's the administrator of the Financial Accountability and Information Services Office. So today we are recording this event, and our hope is that we'll be able to post this on our webpage so it can be viewed later. So please forgive us a little bit as we do this through our process. We need to do things a little bit differently when we are presenting this way, so we'll spell out the links throughout the presentation at times. So just be patient with us. If you have any questions throughout the event, please use the Q&A function. And also we have emailed out the handouts for today's meeting, so you should receive those. Either you should have already received them or you should be receiving them shortly. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So again, if after the presentation, if you have questions, you can always email SACSinfo. And so you can at sacsinfo@cde.ca.gov. And we'll go ahead and get started with some announcements. So we are beginning our 21-22 unaudited actuals data submissions. This is the time of the year we take a look at all the data submissions throughout your UA data, and we will look at your indirect cost calculation to ensure that the rates are calculated in accordance with the CDE's delegation agreement with the U.S. Department of Ed. So always be aware that we may be reaching out to LEAs and asking them questions regarding their UA data. And also as a reminder, to always just make sure that you're coding in your expenditures correctly. I know that may sound silly right now, but with the home to school reimbursement program, which we will talk about shortly, it's just a reminder again that it's very important that you code your expenditures to the correct account codes. And also we have a new consultant on board in our office. Her name is Julie Hong. And so we welcome her. She's just getting started, but you will start to see her name as she starts to send emails and ask questions. So welcome her, please. Okay. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and shift it over to Rigo, and he will talk about the home to school transportation.
Hello, well, thank you, John. And so I'm going to go over a summary of what the home to school program is, as well as some additional accounting information. So for the summary, the Home to School Reimbursement Program was established pursuant to Education Code Section 41850.1, added by Assembly Bill 181, and it was later amended by Assembly Bill 185. So this program allows for school districts and county offices of education that provide transportation services to be eligible for funding. Charter schools are not eligible to receive these funds, and neither is the school district that converted all of its schools to charter schools. So funding is based on 60% of eligible transportation expenses, determined by Function 3600, reported in the unaudited actuals data of the prior fiscal year, less any LCFF add-on amount. For example, the distribution of funds for fiscal year 22-23 is scheduled for June 2023 and will use unaudited actuals expenditures from fiscal year 21-22. A website with additional program information, including frequently asked questions, is being developed. For program questions, please contact the CDE Transportation Office. Their email address is ost@cde.ca.gov. So in regards to resource code and revenue object code, once these funds are received, it is recommended for LEAs to record the receipt of these funds with resource 0000 and object revenue code 8590. Next slide, please. So excluded expenditures. Expenditures that are excluded for reimbursement are capital outlay and non-agency expenditures. CDE will remove from the calculation expenses coded with object codes 6,000 through 6,999 and goal codes 7,100 through 7,199. As John mentioned earlier, it is highly recommended for LEAs to record expenditures with their proper coding to prevent audit findings. For additional information of what constitutes these expenditures, please review Procedures 320 and Procedure 330 within the California School Accounting Manual, also known as CSAM. In regards to indirect costs, it has been determined that an LEA can charge indirect costs at the LEA approved rate. Pending any questions, next will be Hillary.
Thank you, Rico. I'm here today to talk about the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, per pupil expenditure reporting. Our collection period will be November of 2022 through March of 2023, as in prior years. We're currently updating the frequently asked questions section of the ESSA PPE portion of our website, so please stay tuned for updates to that. LEAs will receive access codes at the end of November or the beginning of December. And unlike in prior years, we will be using fall enrollment data to report for this year. In the past, LEAs did have a choice. However, in order to allow for better comparisons and continuity of data throughout the state, we've made a determination that this year, LEAs will use fall enrollment data. We also plan to hold 3 webinars this January, and additional information will be forthcoming on those. Please note that we do plan to record one of those and post it on our website as well for further reference. Does anyone have any questions about the ESSA per pupil expenditure reporting requirements?
Hillary, it's Christine. Yes. I noticed on the slide it says December 2022 starting collection, and you mentioned November. Can you please clarify?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, they will receive their access codes at the end of November. There was a misprint on the slide. They will be receiving their access codes at the end of November after Thanksgiving. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Now we'll be hearing from John, who will be talking about the school level finance survey.
Great. Thank you, Hillary. So I'd like to introduce everyone to a new proposed federal reporting requirement. It is going to be called the School Level Finance Survey, or for the time being, the SLFS. So the National Center of Education Statistics, also known as the NCES, with support from the U.S. Census Bureau, is making this requirement mandatory for all 50 states to aid with public concerns regarding equitable distribution of school-level funding within and across school districts. Now, the proposed data collection will be required beginning this year using 21-22 school year data. For the current year collection, using the school year data of 21-22, the CDE will utilize the ESSA per pupil expenditure data that we receive from LEAs to fulfill the requirement. Now, as Hillary had just mentioned, in the past, we had recommended that LEAs use enrollment when calculating their ESSA PPE amounts. However, since some LEAs use ADA to calculate the amount, we will now be instructing LEAs to use the Fall 1 enrollment figure as the divisor in calculating the ESSA PPE. So therefore, those LEAs that currently use ADA, this should be the only impact for this year's collection. So the impact on LEAs comes in next year's reporting period, which will utilize school year 22-23 data. Now, the proposed requirement has a few different elements that are going to be needed. First, we need to collect the total current expenditures amount by school level. And remember that when we collect per pupil amounts at the school level for the ESSA PPE requirement. So this part of the requirement shouldn't be too bad since we've already, most LEAs should already have that data. Now, the other part of the requirement is a few additional elements that needed to be recorded at a school level. Now, these are going to include total expenditures broken into 4 separate functions. Those will be instruction, student support services, instructional staff support, and school administration. Additionally, LEAs will need to include 3 exhibits, and these exhibits will be teacher salaries within the instruction function broken down by salaries and benefits, instructional aid salaries within the instruction function, and books and periodicals within the instruction and instructional staff support services function. Now, currently, we are looking at a few different options to collect the data, which would begin next year. Which will be using the current school year data of 22-23. And we are thinking that we may modify the ESSA PPE reporting application to collect this data. Those are both federally required. I know that the SLFS is proposed, but if it goes through, there will then be 2 reporting requirements that we're going to need to fulfill. So we may modify the ESSA PPE reporting application to collect both of them. Now, right now, we have a brief period that we can actually comment on the proposed regulations. And we do have a few questions that we would like to bring out to those that are listening. And so you can see the 2 questions. Now, do you foresee any impediments for LEAs being able to report this data? And would you need to make any significant changes to your local financial systems? I'm not expecting a big response right now, but if you could please email me at saxinfo@cde.ca.gov by November 15th and provide me with any comments or concerns, I would greatly appreciate it. So with that said, do we have any questions regarding this right now?
John, there is one question in the Q&A. So since ESSA per pupil is used in 2022-23 for this new survey, there is nothing extra for us to do in this year?
That is correct. There is nothing extra. We worked with the feds on this and told them we could not make this change this quickly for them. So they are allowing us to use the ESSA per pupil expenditure data. However, we need to provide them with the membership data that all the LEAs are using. That's why we are asking for all the LEAs to use the enrollment fall 1 figure for this year. That way we have a consistent membership data number that we can provide to the feds so that they can get the information that they're looking for to fulfill the requirement.
And then, John, do you see the other question?
Let's see, would we include sub cost, extra hours, etc., or just base salary and benefits? We'll have to find an answer for you on that one, Becky. I believe right now it's just going to be base salary and benefits, but as we get more information about this, we will definitely communicate that out to everybody so that there's just a real clear understanding of exactly what we are going to need. So thank you, Becky, for that. Okay, so again, if you have anything additional that you would like to ask or have any concerns, again, please email me at saxinfo@cde.ca.gov. And if I can get that by November 15th, that would be wonderful. So thank you. And I'm going to pass this on to Agnes now. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Today, this is another update about the Gatsby 96, the subscription-based information technology arrangement, and I think we can just call it SPIDERS. That actually is already effective for this school year 2022-23. And again, I just put the definition here again. What is really the definition? Definition of the SPIDER is a contract that conveys control of the right to use another party as SPIDER vendor's information technology software alone or in combination with tangible capital assets, the underlying IT assets, as specified in the contract for a period of time in an exchange or exchange-like transaction. Next slide. And you can see that all basically, this SPIDER, if you really look at the definition compared to the definition of the lease, for the Gatsby 87, they're very, very similar. And again, we talking about that before. Basically, there's really 4 key elements you really have to meet. Basically, is first, you really need to have a control. And second, underlying IT assets. And 3, you need to have a subscription term. And lastly, it really has to be an exchange or exchange-like transaction. So basically means, all the SPIDERs really meet the definition as a lease, for the Gatsby 87. And then you can ask, okay, what are really the difference? So if you have a contract, and that contract mainly is really just talking about with a tangible capital assets alone, then we will go by Gatsby 87. If, that asset is mainly is really just the IT software alone, then we will go by Gatsby 96. But somehow, if it's really an IT software with a combination with the tangible capital assets, and in that case, you really need to look at it. It's the cost of the software component is it significant compared to the cost of the underlying tangible capital assets? If it's really insufficient, it's really cost is really, tiny compared to the cost of the underlying tangible assets, then we will use Gatsby 87. Otherwise, we will follow Gatsby 96. And one of the good examples is, for example, we all know that all the copy machines, they have some kind of IT component within the copier. But technically, that IT component within the copier is really insignificant compared to the actual copying machine itself. So if you really have a smart copier, so that should that should follow the Gatsby 87 instead. Next. And under this Gatsby 96, there are some is really exclusion. First is really those we call the perpetual software license. If you already buy a license, you have a perpetual license on the software, means you really don't have a limit. You basically have an unlimited period of time to access to the software, and it's not really meet the definition of the Gatsby 96, because the Gatsby 96 has a definite period of time. So, but also at the same time, I kind of be aware is, sometimes, we can see some arrangement where we say we label them as a subscription because there might be some of the installment plan, but technically they're not really, subscription. Because why? Because if you have a perpetual software license, means you have an unlimited period of time to access to the software, then it's not Gatsby 96. And also at the same time, if that, your contract basically is really strictly talking about IT support, it's just kind of like the maintenance service in the lease, that is also excluded from the Gatsby 96. And the other thing is, another exclusion from the Gatsby 96 is the Gatsby 96 is really for the government to use other vendors' underlying IT assets. But if a government, we as a LEA, if you do provide some kind of service to outside party to using your underlying IT assets, also excluded from the Gatsby 96. Next. Just really similar to the GASB 87 leases. Under the GASB 96, they also have something we call the short-term speeder. Short-term speeder means that the maximum possible term is 12 months or less. If it's really in that case, your subscription payment will be just recognized just like a regular expenditures. And also at the same time, there's no specific disclosure requirement for the short-term speeders. Next. Other than that, if you do have a contract meet the definition for the speeder, and also at the same time they are not only short-term, then in your governmental fund, then first you have to report expenditure and your financial source at the first time when you recognize your subscription asset. And when you talk about how you calculated it, the measurement you should use the GASB 96 paragraph 16 through 18 for the calculation. Next. And this, on this one is, talking about, okay, the previous slide we talked about in the governmental fund, and this slide we're talking about is at the year end when you prepare your governmental-wide financial statements. It's kind of report a little bit differently, is that you should recognize a subscription liability and a subscription asset at the same time. Next. And then, after that, each subscription payment, you should first allocate it first to somehow as an interest liability. And then the other rest will be kind of, to the subscription liability to reduce your liability. At the same time, the subscription assets reported in the governmental-wide financial statements also need to be amortized in a systematic and rational manner over either the shorter of the subscription term or the useful life of the underlying IT asset. And then the measurement of the subscription assets is very, very similar to the lease assets, per the GASB 87. The only exception is because this is the GASB 96, they do thinking about is, somehow some of the implementation costs can be capitalized and included in the cost with the subscription assets. So the GASB 96 also at the same time, they also, divide, some implementation costs into 3 stages. First, the preliminary project stage, and according to the GASB 96, that you should just expense it, not capitalize it. But for the initial implementation stage, those should be capitalized. But the last stage, operational and the additional implementation stage, those should be expensed. And then, like one example is say, if you, going to have a large, accounting system you need to implement, definitely you have a lot of modules. So like for the first module, maybe you want to implement the general ledger first. So according to the GASB 96, first, once your first module number 1, the general ledger has been already fully functioned and then ready to be used. So all those, initial implementation stage, with the module 1 should be capitalized. But later on, like the module 2, 3, 4, like maybe for the accounts payable, receivable, those should be expensed instead of capitalized into the subscription assets. Next. And because of the new requirement with the subscription assets and the subscription liability, the following objects will be added to our SEC code in order to allow the LEA to report the speeders separately from all other capital assets. On the expenditure side, first is the Object 6700 subscription assets and the Object 6920 amortization expense subscription assets, and that should be only for the propriety and fiduciary funds only. Next. And then for the governmental fund, in order to recognize the other financing source, we will have a new object code 8974, proceeds from speeders. And then for the asset side, we will have a new object 9470, subscription assets, and also the 9475 for the accumulated amortization. And then for the subscription liability, we will have the object code 9660 for that. Next. Okay. Everybody will be asking about when this new object code will be first available in our SACS in our web system. For the SACS web system, the first time you will be available to see them will be in the 2023-24 budget reporting period. Means at that time you'll be able to report, for the 2022-23 estimated actuals and for the 2023-24 budget. Next. At this point in time, there's really no specific implementation guide for the speeders, but since the definition of the lease and the speeders are very, very similar, so during your implementation stage for the speeders, I will follow the GASB implementation guide 2019-3 leases could be really used as a reference. And actually GASB also issue a new statement, GASB 99 Omnibus 2022. They have a 3 particular paragraph regarding for the speeders. The paragraph 23 is really talking about the subscription base. Basically, they're talking about is when you measure your subscription term, if you're thinking about, okay, whether there's a termination option is really should be considered in the subscription term. And basically they say is, if you're thinking about is the other party, they violate, some contract, maybe, don't pay or something, those should not be counted toward to the subscription term when you calculate the whole term. And the paragraph 24 talk about reclassify, the short-term speeders. In case something happened, at first you're thinking about this as short-term speeders, but down the road there's something happen or maybe some circumstances change, then now you need to reclassify them from a short-term into a non-short-term speeder. And in that way, you need to start calculating your speeder assets and your subscription assets and subscription liability. And then lastly, the paragraph 25, the subscription liability is basically, they clarify that, when you calculate your subscription liability and assets, you need to go by certain, discount rate. And for that, even though there's another maybe index change in your discount rate you use, in the first place to determine the subscription liability, if down the road there's any change in that discount rate, you don't need to remeasure the subscription liability. Does anybody have any question about speeders?
Agnes, there is a question in the chat. Can you, or Q&A, can you give a specific example of subscription assets that might be common to most school districts?
I will say it's very common. Actually, one thing is really common, just like the computer, what we'll be using, like Microsoft Office, because in the past, when you buy a laptop or maybe a computer, you will have the Microsoft Office software already loaded in your computer. You can use them. Maybe they may be outdated, but you can still use them. But now, as far as I understand, is all the new one is really coming out. They call the Microsoft Office 365. That means those are really on a subscription base. Maybe at a certain period of time, you have no more access to it. You really have to subscribe in order to use it. Okay, maybe I can go. Okay, ahead.
Oh, there's a couple more. Do you want me to read them or can you see them?
Actually, I can see them. Let me see here.
There's one from Joel. Hi, Joel.
Hi, Joel. Long time no see. Long time no talk. Okay. And Joel asking about if it is a subscription agreement of 12 months or less, it is not considered subscription asset, and we don't have to use this. Yes, just like what I say. The one I'm just talking about subscription asset and subscription liability is only for those bidder agreements more than 12 months. If it's 12 months or less, that is considered as a short term, so it would be just like the regular expenditures. You don't have to report any subscription assets or liability. Okay, and then I see Natalie. Can CDE consider adding the bidder object codes sooner than the estimated actuals? We need to add those new object combinations to our financial systems. Yes, I understand, but also at the same time, we're really developing the SaaS web system at this time. So that's really try our best, working with our developer. But as we all understand, when you develop a new system, it's not that easy. And then, adding all this new bidder object codes also is really adding on a lot more layer for the developing, development, stage. So we were thinking about it, but at this point in time, I think the best way we really can do is really estimate the actuals for the 2022-23. Okay, and then I see another question about Denise. Is the GASB 96 related to the IT only? Can you give me? Yeah, the GASB 96 is really talk about subscription-based IT only. That is true. If we really strictly talk about non-IT subscription, I'm not so sure what is really non-IT subscription, but I can say, that's why, early on I say, if you really look at GASB 87 leases versus GASB 96, they're very, very similar. So basically, you have to look at the definition. If it really does not fit meet GASB 96, it may meet GASB 87 leases, because GASB 87 leases is talking about tangible capital assets. Is there any example of what type of subscription the bidder is referring to, maybe on CDE? I think Christine, maybe I already answered your question.
Right. So there was a similar question previously, but I think Kirsten's asking specifically if we will provide examples like on our website. What we can do, Agnes, we can when we do the notes for this meeting, let's try to come up with some specific examples we can provide in the notes. How does that sound?
Sounds good. We can do that.
We will do that.
Yeah, make myself a note too. And Terry has a question. Don't you also have to record subscriptions that are likely to be renewed each year as well, making them? Well, that's a really good question, Terry. Actually, like what I mentioned before is, that's no specific, implementation guide, particularly for the GASB 96. But if you really read the implementation guide for the GASB 87, they have 2 questions. I remember the first question that they talk about, hey, what about if this is a lease? They can renew maybe for renew for the next 10 years is really considered is a short-term lease or not. And I remember, that particular question is because it is still considered the same contract, but they just keep renewing on an annual basis for the next 5 or even 10 years. Those are not short-term lease, because when you talk about possible maximum term, it's really more than 12 months. But that is another, really good question in the implementation guide. Is talk about, hey, how about if it's distributable lease, it's also for 12 months, but they allow them to renew, but they renew as a separate contract for the next 12 months, because the key is they renew, they have another renew, but they renew as a separate contract. Is it really this is a short-term lease? And then the answer say, yes, it's a short-term lease. So I hope it will help. Okay, and Timothy asking about for the Microsoft Office 365 example, would that be considered exclusion from perpetual? Well, when you say perpetual subscription, do you really buy it? As far as I understand, right now with this Microsoft Office 365, technically you're not really loaded on your computer. Means, once your term ends, I don't think you can access to that software anymore. So it's really unlike the perpetual in the old days. Actually, you really have the CD or something is really already loaded into your computer, and you can keep using it. Maybe they already outdated, like the Microsoft Office, maybe 2009. Those are really not really support anymore, but you can still use them. Unlike the Microsoft Office 365, I don't think you can use them anymore. And that's another question. IT multi-year contract, 5-year subscription. Each year is cost out individually. I think, again, you really have to look at the definition. If I'm just strictly, you talk about it's really a 5 years, definitely it's really longer than the 12 months. It looks like it's really a subscription based, and then it really meet the definition with the Gatsby 96. If it's really the case, it will be subject to Gatsby 96. But again, without really looking the contract more in detail, it's really hard to determine. Okay, and then Carter Chen asking, we will provide some example. Yes, and I think, for the next SACS forum, I believe it should be sometime in February. We will, try to provide some accounting entries for the Gatsby 96, just similar to the Gatsby 87 we did before. And Young Kim, license for Escape is also applied to Gatsby 96. Personally, I'm not really familiar about how is really the license agreement your LEA with the Escape. I cannot say at this point, but again, if you can, shoot me more information, we can, work together to see whether it really apply. Need to use apply to the Gatsby 96. And you can send the information to saxinfo@cde.ca.gov. Okay, and then Han asking about, is there still validation table in the Excel available for the new web-based SACS? Christine, maybe you need help me with that. I'm not so sure what we're gonna do.
Han, this is Christine. If you are talking about that whether you can download Excel validation table files from our website, yes, you will still continue to be able to do that. We actually did post the last table updates, which I think were as of September 19th or something like that. But you can always download the latest validation tables from our website. As we've announced in the past with the new SACS web system, those tables get automatically updated in the system instead of users having to manually update them, but we do definitely make them available on our website. So I hope that's what your question was. If not, please post something clarifying in the Q&A.
Thank you, Christine. Okay, and David had another question. You just want to confirm, just much like any new accounting standard, we could work with our auditor to determine the materiality of the GASB 96 before we decided whether we need to change our current practice, correct? Then, yes, David, just like basically for the GASB 87 and GASB 96, yes, you can thinking about the materiality about that, to determine whether it's really need to record it or not. But I just kind of be a little bit cautious, because if you have a similar contract by itself, they may not be significant. But if you have a similar contract, but if you add all those similar type of contract together in an aggregate level, they may become significant. So in that sense, maybe you really have to really work with the auditors. And as far as I understand, GASB in the statements themselves, they really don't particularly prevent you to doing it. And actually, the GASB board, they believe this is really a management decision what to do, and to make sure the financial statement is really provide clear message to the user. So yes, definitely you can work with the auditor to determine. In regards to Excel validation tables, will they be expanded to include the standard staff compliance account fields that are missing? I'm not so sure what I'm missing here.
Birgadine, I'm not sure what you're asking. Some of the tables do not have validation combos for all potential combinations. We're not going to expand. I'm thinking, for example, the resource by object combination table. We only validate resource codes with revenue type objects and asset and liability accounts, but we don't validate with expenditure objects. That is not going to change. So we're not expanding any of those validation tables to include code combinations that we didn't in the past.
Yes.
If that's what you're asking.
Yeah, if that's what you're asking. And also same time be aware that especially like that's another table like the goal by function. We don't check all functions too. So just be aware, if it's not on the validation table, does not mean they are not valid. Just because, you have to read our description, our in our CD webpage, we really clearly define, we don't check all combination, especially for the goal by function table.
Right, and so she's sent a quick clarification that she was referring to the 2000 function codes. And correct, we are not going to add 2000 function code combination validations. We only validate, that must be the goal by function, Agnes, where we validate the instruction.
I think usually we only validate 1000, 3000, most likely.
We validate the 1000 functions, 4000.
I think also 3000. I think, yeah, 1000, 4000.
And 5000s?
Something like that. I don't remember on top of the head, but definitely we don't validate all functions. Okay. So next, we're going to talking about this California Schools Healthy Air, Plumbing, and Efficient Program, which is called CalSHAPE coding. Recently we still receive quite a lot questions through our staff info talking about this particular CalSHAPE program. Basically this program is really managed by the California Energy Commission, and why that should be using resource code 9010 as a local restricted, and the revenue code 8699. Because after we receive all the questions, we're looking into this grant more in detail and find out that the funding source for this particular grant actually is really not coming from the state. It's really coming from the local utilities companies. So because of the funding source, that's why we decided that should be using the resource code 9010, not resource 7810 as a state revenue. So if there's no more questions, I'm going to pass on to Christine talking about SACS and financial reporting, especially a web system.
Thank you, Agnes. So I'm going to give an update on the SACS web-based financial reporting system, or our SACS web system. If you all aren't aware, and hopefully you all are by now, we did release the first interim financial reporting functionality for 2022-23. We released that on November 1st, so last Tuesday, so it's been live for about a week now. We do have problems and fixes, which we're really calling issues and workarounds. We have posted those directly within the system. You can see those when you first log into the system. On your dashboard, there's a little text area at the very top of the screen where we are posting those issues and workarounds. Just something notable that I want to bring to your attention. This only affects our Joint Powers Agency LEAs, but just make sure you're aware that currently the criteria and standards form for JPAs has some known bugs, and our development team is having to go back through that form and make sure it's working correctly and reprogram it. So please don't use the criteria and standards at this time for joint powers agencies only. When we have received word that it's ready, CDE will be testing it, and then as soon as we believe it's ready for publishing, there will be a system update for that. We also have a couple other additional bugs that are posted. They were actually posted yesterday. They have to do with the technical review check, check unbalanced B, and there is currently an exception flagging for that check. It's related to the form MYPI internal form checks that, even though they clear the technical review check and balance B, is not showing that it's cleared. So unfortunately, there's no workaround for that right now. Our development team is working on that bug as well, and that will be remedied in a system release update. And then one other one to be aware of, it's on the criteria and standards form. It affects school districts, and there are a couple of items, S8A and S8B. I'm not going to try to describe it in detail because I'm sure I will mess it up, but just know there's some issues with the way the answers to those items are rendering, and then subsequently how they affect the technical review check CS yes no. Again, that prevents the that technical review check from actually clearing. So we basically have a couple of issues that are preventing technical review checks from clearing. Again, those are being worked on by our development team, and as soon as they are fixed, and then also as soon as the JPA criterion standards form is fixed, we will push out a release update. And I don't have an estimated time for that right now. I am going to be speaking with our development team today to get an update on that, but they are working as quickly as possible to get that remedied. And then I wanted to point out some training resources that we have available on the SACS web training materials and recorded sessions link webpage. That webpage is https://www.sites.google.com/view/SACS web training, all one word. We did post a recording or a link to the recording from one of our October 2002 training sessions. The materials from that training session are also available on that page. Just make sure you scroll down to the very bottom of that page. I know we've had questions that, where is that material, but you actually have to scroll down. And also as a reminder, on that page are the training materials and a couple of the training sessions that were held back in April of 2022 by our County Office of Education partners regarding the SACS web system. So if anybody on this webinar is new to SACS web system, you didn't use it for the budget reporting period, I highly recommend that you use those resources on that web page to help you navigate the SACS web system. And one other thing I want to mention is our upcoming reporting period. So after first interim, we have the second interim reporting period, and CDE expects to release that functionality probably around the middle of January. And just note that you cannot, at this time, you can't access that functionality. I know we had some LEAs that actually did go in and access the first interim reporting functionality prior to CDE announcing that it was available. So just note, if you were one of those LEAs, if you had data sets in the draft area, that we did delete those data sets, because you would have had some significant issues if you tried to use those data sets for your first interim reporting. And I believe that's all I have. Are there any questions? Let's see. Anna is asking that last time when the release updates happened, we needed to not work in it while updating. Are there any timeframes for these releases? And I think I already answered. I'm not really sure at this time. I'm hoping within the next week or two, but we will definitely notify users when those release updates happen. And Brianne is asking, when can we expect a comprehensive manual on SACS Web? So we are definitely in the process of developing a standalone user guide like we do have with the legacy SACS. It's taking us a little bit longer than expected, unfortunately, but we are currently in the process of getting that updated. You're probably aware that just like with the SACS legacy system, when you're in a screen, if you see a little question mark next to the page heading, you can click on that and that will bring you to a help screen. And also from that help screen, you'll see some menus on the left and on the right. So you can use that to also navigate to different areas of the online manual. But thank you for your patience. We are definitely working on getting a standalone manual developed. Let's see. And then Joel is asking, is there any talk of restoring the printed SACS forms to what they used to look like? I don't know what you're talking about, Joel. Our printed forms are close to what they look like. I think I know you're probably talking about, there's still some formatting issues with forms. They may look a little different as far as justification and the size of the columns and whatnot. So just know that we are very aware that there continue to be formatting issues with the forms, and the development team is prioritizing those with other programming tasks. So Obviously, we are prioritizing functionality that our users need to actually prepare their submissions. And we're considering the form issues cosmetic. And I know it's not pretty, but we're prioritizing and we're doing our best to get these, to get the forms fixed as quickly as we can. And then Arizel, I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that right, is asking, I'm unable to access the training materials website. You keep getting an error that the site can't be reached. Okay, I'm going to have to look into that. I think I was just on that page yesterday, so I'm not aware of any issues. So let me look into that, and I'll get back to you. Thanks. Okay, I don't see any other questions related to the SACS software. So I should say SACS web-based system. So I am going to turn it over to Derek Moore, who's going to talk about the program by resource report.
Okay, thanks, Christine. Hello, this is Derek.
Hey, Derek,
Oops.
I'm sorry.
That's
Because
okay.
I just saw a question asked by Katie. She's talking about, even though this is not on today's agenda, but she's kind of asking about, because now special education qualifies a child for eligibility in a CSPP, I believe it's the preschool program, regardless of income. Is it possible to change the validation tables so that, they can use the 5,000 goal in the Fund 12? I think, we need to thinking about more about that. Maybe we can discuss more with you, Katie, later, because Fund 12 literally is really for child development. So that's why at this time we really only, open. So that's why all the goals is really mainly for the preschool and the 8,500, like the child development goal. So if you're gonna using the 5,000 goals, a lot of time the 5,000 goals is really particularly for the special education. Are you really using any restricted special education money for for those special education kids, the 5,000 goals in the Fund 12? So if it's really the case, I think we need to talk about more. So if you can send your questions to the SACS info, I can answer your questions more in detail. Thank you, Katie. Sorry, Derek.
That's okay. Okay, so hello, this is Derek. So we just wanted to bring to everyone's attention a change that we just made to the program by resource report. It's also called the report PGM for the SACSOL 2021-22 unaudited actuals period. So hopefully everyone's seeing a copy or example of the report on the screen now. So if we can kind of scroll down to the bottom, way to the bottom. Okay, that's good. So so if you look at the indirect cost section, so on the eligible expenditures line item, you can see that we've added the exclusion of Object 4700 food costs to this. It's only highlighted for today's purposes. It won't be, the actual form won't be highlighted. So now the total expenditures amount includes the object codes 1000 through 599, but excludes both the food costs, Object 4700, and a sub-agreement for services expenditures, object code 5100 through 5199. So this reflects a similar change that we made to the Form ICR indirect cost worksheet, and also the Exhibit A, the indirect cost rates charged to programs that was effective beginning with the 2021-22 fiscal year. This change affects all four reports: the object summary, object detail, function summary, and the function detail report tabs. Okay, so if we can kind of scroll up so we can show the expenditures and other financing uses section. Okay, that's good. Thanks. All right, so one other change that we're going to make, although you won't see it here because it's still currently with the programmer, but I can still talk about it, So if you look on the books and supplies line item, you can see now it shows that the 4,000 range, 4,000 through 4,999. Another change that we're going to make is we're gonna break out the Object 4700 expenditures and have that be shown on a separate line item, kind of similar to the way we show the sub-agreement for services separately from the 5,000 range, the services and other expenditures range. This particular change will only affect the object summary and object detail report tabs only. So, okay, so like I said, this change order is still currently with the programmers, but hopefully it'll be completed the next week or so. My understanding that the fixes with the SACS web interim period reporting kind of takes priority over this, but hopefully in the next week or so it'll be done. At which time we'll send everyone a email notification with the updated report template. All right, so I don't know, full disclosure, transparency, and all that. This change should have been done before we actually released the Saxhall software a couple months ago, but unfortunately it was missed, overlooked. So apologies for that. In fact, I didn't catch it until like a month ago when I was actually testing the SACS web version of this and comparing the results to the legacy version. That's when I noticed that this section hadn't been updated yet. So again, apologies. So if you do use this report with the 2021-22 unaudited actual data, or if you're asked to provide this report to someone, just make sure that you download the updated report template and rerun the report for the 2021-22 unaudited actual period. And that's all I have. So hopefully you don't have any questions. If not, then I'll turn it over to Blanche.
Thank you, Derek. So, okay. Good morning, everyone. So I'll be going through some of the updates and workarounds for the Criterion Standards Form. So this screen, we're talking about the SACS Web fiscal year 22-23 first and second interim. This is pertaining to the routine restricted maintenance account. And there are some exclusions update that I want to let everyone know as you're preparing your first interim and also when you are preparing your second interim. So currently right now in SACS Web for first and second interim, the following resource codes will be automatically excluded from the RRMA calculation, and the following are listed in the second bullet here: 3210, 3212, 3212, 3214, 15, and so on. And the next bullet, I want to go through the additional RRMA exclusions that are currently not included. So as you're preparing your first interim, I think some of them are already in the process of, districts will need to manually exclude resources 3225, 3226, 3227, 3228, 5632, 5633, and 5634. So these additional resource codes were not included in the RRMA exclusion calculation when we're developing the SACS 2022 web-based software. Since these were allocated pursuant to Section 2001 of the AERP Act, they should also be excluded. So 3225 and 3226 is part of the after-school education and safety rate increase, and 3227, 3228 is part of the 21st Century Community Learning Center, and 5632, 5633, and 5634 is part of the American Rescue Plan Homeless Children and Youth Program. So I know some districts are already preparing the first interim, so if it's already in the workflow process, you don't have to revise it, as you can make the corrections at second interim. since the compliance of the RRMA is measured against the total general fund expenditures as of the unaudited actuals. So moving on, so this next slide, the first and second interims, it can be overwritten. So this is in form, this would be the criteria and standards form, Form 01 CSI at first and second interim for criterion 7, the facilities maintenance. Line 1, the required minimum contribution field can be overwritten to include the additional resources to be excluded to calculate the required minimum contribution. So the next slide, so as we're proposing for the SACS-WEB 23-24 budget period, this is again applicable to the district's Form 01CS. All the resource codes that I mentioned, the new additional one will be included, so there shouldn't be any further workarounds or manual exclusions. And just a FYI, and in SACS-WEB 23-24, the resource code 3210 and 3215 will be removed from the RRMA exclusion since the expenditure and liquidation period will end in fiscal year 22-23. So let me see if there are any further questions. So if I have a question from Alicia. How about the ELOP resource 7425, 7426, and 7422? So those resource codes were not allocated pursuant to the statute that allowed the exclusion. So those wouldn't be excluded in the RMA calculation. As you, there are so many stimulus funding. So if you actually think other resource codes could be excluded, please send us an email at sexinfo@cde.ca.gov, and we could look into that to see if any other stimulus funding that we may have missed should be included in the RMA exclusion. So if there are no further questions.
Blanche, this is Jody. I'm sorry to interrupt you a minute. I see that on one of your slides, resource 5633 for districts was mentioned as a possible exclusion. And I just wanted to say a new development. I'm meeting with the program office this afternoon, and we may have to open resource 5633 up to districts. There's been some confusion with the program office, so I'm hoping to get that cleared up this afternoon. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, thank you. So if no further questions, I'll pass it back to John.
Great, thanks, Blanche. So our next meeting will be scheduled for February 14th, 2023. And at this time, are there any additional questions? And again, if there isn't, if you have any after this, please email saxinfo@cde.ca.gov.
John, this is Christine. There are a couple other questions in the chat or in the Q&A. I don't know if we want to go ahead, if we have time to go over those.
Sure.
Okay. So we did get a comment from, okay, so this is back to the SACS-WEB system. Somebody made a comment or asked a question about whether anyone is experiencing about a 30-second delay in moving to the next entry field when completing forms in the SACS-WEB system. Karen, I will say that I'm not personally aware of anybody having these issues. I do have staff answering questions, and I can check back with them. There are various, I know we have this issue crop up from time to time. We've had feedback from users from time to time regarding this. Yeah, there could be other situations within the system that could be causing that delay. I'm not saying that these are happening, but there are possibilities such as your own bandwidth and internet speed. Also, users, depending on how many users are in the system at once, there could be There could be a delay. You definitely shouldn't be having a 30-second delay with every single cell. So if you are continuing to have that problem, please feel free to email our help desk, which is sacsweb, SACSWEB, at cde.ca.gov. You can email directly, or you can use the help feature that is actually available in the upper right-hand corner of the SACS screen when you're logged in. There's a drop-down. So please feel free to email us. We do, if we continue to hear these problems from our users, we do like to convey them to our development team so they can monitor performance, because they are doing that. They have been doing it in the past, and they need to continue to monitor performance to make sure the system is working at its optimum capacity. So thank you for noting that. Let's see, and then Janelle had asked about the purpose of the lock feature for draft data sets in the SACS web system, since only one user that can access. Janelle, all I can say on that is I don't think we can make that functionality driven by which whether you're in the draft or official area. I think it's just driven by being in a form and wanting to make edits to forms. We can certainly bring that up with the programmers, but I don't know what kind of a lift that would be to program that to differentiate between a draft submission and an official submission. But again, I just think it's function driven, wherein whenever you need to edit something, you need to do the lock. But we can ask about that in the future. And then Patricia has asked, when will the tools section be available to the general public so they can check accuracy of coding? Patricia, I'm not sure I understand your question. So regarding a tool for the accuracy of coding, that is available to users currently. It's a SACS validation tool. And you should be able to access that through the tools menu as an LEA user. I'm not sure what type of user you are in the system. Right now, public accounts, so like a user that does not need to use any functionality in the system, like importing data sets or editing or approving data sets, we currently do not have functionality available to public users because our publishing functionality is not yet available. So we won't be activating public user accounts until the publishing is made available. Okay, I see a couple. So those of you that are making some additional comments about the lag when you're entering. So I know, Karen, you're saying it's in the SEMAI. So SEMAI, which is the special ed maintenance of effort for the interim period, that form is new to, it's a new form. It wasn't available at budget, but it's available for interim. So we may want to, Agnes, I don't know if you experienced anything when you were testing it, but we can keep an eye on that and let the
Hey, Christine, I think,
Yeah.
you know, what is the issue is because this is the implementation year for the SEMAI. So and all actual, they have to hand key. I think Karen's talking about it took her a long time just to input all those and all the actual data for the prior year. So, and then just Karen, just want to let you know that because of the implementation year, we did not have the prior year data. That's why you have the hand key this year. But moving forward, you don't have to do it anymore. It should be
that's
all
a
the data
good
point. Yes.
That's a good point. So Karen, if you were hand keying that one worksheet because we don't have the unaudited actuals data available, then yes, the good news is you won't have to do that again. And then Kim, I know you're making a comment about cash form, and I know that has caused issues from time to time, but we can definitely mention that to the development team. Yeah, I see the comments. So we'll definitely, I'll make sure that I grab some of these comments from this Q&A once we have the hard copy transcripts and relay it to our development team. And then I know some of these are just about functionality. Han, I see your comment. I'll have to read that offline and see what we can do. I know, again, we appreciate everybody's patience with this new system. I think definitely there's a learning curve, but as you start working with it, it will become easier to use. And, you know, we are continuing to refine it as it expands for each reporting period. Okay, yeah, I still see MYP lagging. Okay. I think that's it. I don't know any of the other team if there were any other questions related to any of the other content that slipped in there with these SACS web questions that you noticed.
Thanks, Christine. Not that I can see offhand, but if there was, we can always reach back out. And then again, if you did have a question and we missed it, please email us at sacsinfo@cde.ca.gov. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for attending, and we will post this information, this presentation, as soon as we can to the website. And with that, we will see everyone later. Have a good rest of your week. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.